And nobody knows about this book except those of us who blurbed it. You know, Bobby Kennedy Jr. blurbed it, I blurbed it. And I talk about it wherever I go because, not because I feel sorry for the guy, although I do, but because it's open and shut. The 2004 election was stolen, okay? And yet, to this day, it is a given that any suggestion that that's the case is conspiracy theory, it's paranoia, it's sour grapes, it's Democratic propaganda, which is ironic because the Democratic Party, and I know somebody will ask me about this, the Democratic Party has been as silent on this issue as the media. The Democrats don't talk about this at all. And in fact, I'll give you an example. There's a lot of really terrific documentaries about the 2004 election, and I will name them for you, but there's one in particular called Stealing America Vote by Vote. You can get these on DVD. And in Stealing America Vote by Vote, there is an interview with a guy named Bob Hagan, H-A-G-A-N, who was an Ohio state senator in Youngstown. He cast his vote in Youngstown on Election Day 2004. He pressed the button for Kerry, and the light for Bush lit up, which happened all over Ohio. You know, the movie has, you know, person after person after person saying, I pushed the button for Kerry and the light for Bush lit up. And this actually happened in about a dozen states around the country. If you want an archive of firsthand accounts by voters of their experience on Election Day, let me recommend something called the Election Incident Reporting System. That's EIRS. You just do a Google search on EIRS and then type in the year of the election and whatever place you're interested in, a county, a city, a state, and you get transcripts of people's phone calls. It's very incomplete because the system was badly undermanned, and it was basically answering machines, and they were, you know, most people got busy signals that day. But those who did manage to get through left their experiences. This is what happened to me. And you know, in about 12 states, people repeatedly said, I pushed the button for Kerry in the light. Okay, so this was a, you know, if it had been a computer glitch, it would have affected both parties equally. But in almost no instances did a Bush vote turn into a Kerry vote. That's very significant, okay? We're not allowed to talk about that. Nobody ever mentioned it. But here's the interesting thing. Bob Hagan had this experience. This guy's a Democrat, a Democratic office holder, tries to vote for Kerry, and the machine makes him vote for Bush. So he called the Kerry campaign, and he says on camera, they said, don't talk about this, keep this to yourself, we don't want this to get around. See? So the idea that discussing all this somehow Democratic propaganda is completely false, because the Democrats have been nowhere on this issue. And if we go back and look at 2004, we see that not only was it a matter of vote flipping, but there was also a systematic shortage of working machines in Democratic precincts nationwide. Only Democratic precincts, not in Republican precincts. And whenever there were instances of disinformation saying your polling place has been moved 3 blocks away, or polling places not opened on time or opened at all, or machines freezing and breaking, that this always affected Democratic voters, didn't affect Republican voters. Now we can say that this is either the world's biggest coincidence or that this was a deliberate attempt to decide the election through illegitimate means. Well, none of this has been permissible. None of this evidence is allowable, has been allowable in the court of public opinion. The media has shied away from it. My own books, and in this, my experience is typical. I'm not the only one, because a number of us have written books on this. My books are completely blacked out. No reviews, no national reviews, no interviews, no appearances on NPR or anything. In fact, my previous book, Fooled Again, which is an analysis of the 2004 election, WHYY-FM, which is the NPR affiliate in Philadelphia, actually refused to run paid ads for the book. They wouldn't run them. I mean, they said they would. They said, sure, we advertise books all the time. Send us the copy. They got the copy and they said, hey, we're not doing this. We don't do political advertising, they said. I said, I'm not running for office. You know, this is a book about elections, which I think people should know about. And they said, no, we can't just advertise any book. And the guy actually said to me, I mean, we wouldn't advertise Mein Kampf. You know. So I said, oh, you wouldn't? Really? Oh, damn it. Damn it. Anyway, this has just been bizarre. But, you know, aside from my own experience, which is, you know, in the great scheme of things, unimportant. And I could recite other stories of other people who've written books that had the same experience. What I really want to say to you here tonight, on the basis of what I've just told you, is that because the press and the Democratic Party have resolutely refused to allow discussion of this issue, okay, we are now at a moment of extreme precariousness and anxiety about this next election, or at least we are if we've been paying attention. The Democratic Party is already running victory laps and popping champagne corks and picking out the drapes. You know, we've heard these cliches. And indeed, pollsters say that when a candidate has a lead as big as Obama has for as long as he has had it, this close to the election, his defeat would be unprecedented. So if this were a normal election, if we had a transparent and trustworthy election system, I think the contest would indeed be over. But we don't have that kind of a system, and we have a great deal to worry about. Now let me talk a little bit about that, tell you what's been happening nationwide, tell you some things that you undoubtedly haven't heard because there's really no way you could have heard them unless you talked to me or 3 or 4 other people. And then I'm going to relieve the anxiety and the dread that you're probably feeling already with some hopeful and constructive advice. Because although this must sound daunting to you if you haven't heard it before, again, I want to say this is a problem we can solve. This is something we can overcome, but not without facing up to it. Okay? Now, the theft of elections involves 2 sets of activities, 2 different sets of activities. One is vote suppression. Vote suppression basically involves preempting votes through a broad variety of means, both legal and illegal. Okay? So we're talking, for example, about legislation passed requiring people to bring certain kinds of documentation to the polls. There's a very strict law in Indiana that was passed last year, the photo ID law, which requires all voters to come to the polls with a state-issued photo ID. Otherwise, you can't vote. You can cast a provisional ballot, but the provisional ballot will be thrown away unless you take a trip to the county seat within 10 days and file an affidavit, which is pretty complicated for voting and beyond the means of poor people. Now, a lot of folks who frequent shopping malls and feel pretty good about life in general will say, well, geez, what's the big deal? Why is it a big deal to require getting a photo ID? Well, for poor people, it's a hardship. It's first of all, it costs a little money, and second of all, it requires making a trip into the bureaucracy, which is foreign to most of these people in the cities and so on. The fact is, the law was intended to disenfranchise people and was passed on the basis of the claim there was an epidemic of voter fraud in Indiana, and the only way to solve the voter fraud problem, which is to say people stuffing the ballot box and so on, they had to pass this law to make voting more difficult and to put up that requirement so that voter fraud would be defeated. Okay, but there's actually no known case of any voter fraud of that type ever having been committed in Indiana, but it didn't matter. The fear that voter fraud might occur became sufficient grounds to pass laws actually disenfranchising voters. So that's the law in Indiana, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court in May.